Timeline of Swedish history. Late Paleolithic and Mesolithic, 12,000–4000 BCE. The Pleistocene glaciations scoured the landscape clean and covered much of it in deep Quaternary sediments. Therefore, no undisputed earlier Middle Paleolithic sites or finds are known from Sweden. As far as it is currently known, the country's prehistory begins in the Allerod interstadial c. 12,000 BC with late Paleolithic hunting camps of the Brom culture at the edge of the ice in what is now the country's southernmost province. Shortly before the close of the Younger Dryas, the west coast of Sweden was visited by hunter-gatherers from northern Germany. This cultural group is commonly referred to as the Arensbergian and were engaged in fishing and sealing along the coast of western Sweden during seasonal rounds from the continent. Currently we refer to this group as the Hensbacker culture era and, in Norway, as the Fosna culture or group. During the late pre-boreal period, colonization continued as people moved towards the northeast as the ice receded. Archaeological, linguistic and genetic evidence suggests that they arrived first from the southwest and, in time, also from the northeast and met halfway. An important consequence of deglaciation was a continual land uplift as the Earth's crust rebounded from the pressure exerted by the ice. This process, which was originally very rapid, continues to this day. It has had the consequence that originally shorebound sites along much of Sweden's coast are sorted chronologically by elevation. Around the country's capital, for instance, the earliest seal hunter sites are now on inland mountain tops, and they grow progressively later as one moves downhill toward the sea. The late Paleolithic gave way to the first phase of the Mesolithic in c. 9600 BC. This age, divided into the Maglemosian, Kongamosian and Ertebol periods, was characterized by small bands of hunter-gatherer fishes with a microlithic flint technology. Where flint was not readily available, quartz and slate were used. In the later Ertebol, semi-permanent fishing settlements with pottery and large inhumation cemeteries appeared. Neolithic, 4000–1700 BCE. Farming and animal husbandry, along with monumental burial, polished flint axes and decorated pottery, arrived from the continent with the funnel beaker culture in c. 4000 BC. Whether this happened by diffusion of knowledge or by mass migration or both is controversial. In a century or two, all of Denmark and the southern third of Sweden became Neolithized and much of the area became dotted with megalithic tombs. Farmers were capable of rearing calves to collect milk from cows all year round. The people of the country's northern two-thirds retained an essentially Mesolithic lifestyle into the first millennium BC. Coastal southeastern Sweden, likewise, reverted from Neolithization to a hunting and fishing economy after only a few centuries, with the pitted ware culture. In c. 2800 BC the funnel beaker culture gave way to the battle axe culture, a regional version of the Middle European corded ware phenomenon. Again, diffusion of knowledge or mass migration is disputed. The battle axe and pitted ware people then coexisted as distinct archaeological entities until c. 2400 BC, when they merged into a fairly homogeneous late Neolithic culture. This culture era produced the finest flintwork in Scandinavian prehistory and the last megalithic tombs. Bronze Age, 1700 to 500 BCE. Sweden's southern third was part of the stock-keeping and agricultural Nordic Bronze Age cultures area, most of it being peripheral to the culture's Danish center. The period began in c. 1700 BC with the start of bronze importation, first from Ireland and then increasingly from Central Europe. Copper mining was never tried locally during this period, and Scandinavia has no tin deposits, so all metal had to be imported, though it was largely cast into local designs on arrival. Iron production began locally toward the period's end, apparently as a kind of trade secret among bronze casters. Iron was almost exclusively used for tools to make bronze objects. The Nordic Bronze Age was entirely pre-urban, with people living in hamlets and on farmsteads with single-story wooden longhouses. Geological and topographical conditions were similar to those of today, but the climate was milder. Rich individual burials attest to increased social stratification in the early Bronze Age. A correlation between the amount of bronze in burials and the health status of the deceased's bones shows that status was inherited. Battle-worn weapons show that the period was warlike. The elite most likely built its position on control of trade. The period's abundant rock carvings largely portray long-rowing ships. These images appear to allude both to trade voyages and to mythological concepts. Areas with rich bronze finds and areas with rich rock art occur separately, suggesting that the latter may represent an affordable alternative to the former. Bronze Age religion as depicted in rock art centers upon the sun, fertility and public ritual. Wetland sacrifices played an important role. The later part of the period after about 1100 BC shows many changes. Cremation replaced inhumation in burials, burial investment declined sharply, and jewelry replaced weaponry as the main type of sacrificial goods. Iron Age, 500 BCE to 1100 CE. In the absence of any Roman occupation, Sweden's Iron Age is reckoned up to the introduction of stone architecture and monastic quarters about CE 1100. Much of the period is proto-historical, that is, there are written sources but most hold a very low source-critical quality. The scraps of written matter are either much later than the period in question, written in areas far away, or local and coeval but extremely brief. Pre-Roman Iron Age, 501 BCE. The archaeological record for the 5th–3rd centuries BCE is rich in rural settlements and remains of agriculture but very poor in artifacts. This is mainly due to extremely austere burial customs where few people received formal burial and those who did got little in the way of grave goods. There is little indication of any social stratification. Bronze importation ceased almost entirely and local iron production started in earnest. The climate took a turn for the worse, forcing farmers to keep cattle indoors over the winters, leading to an annual build-up of manure that could now for the first time be used systematically for soil improvement. Fields were, however, still largely impermanent, leading to the gradual coalescence of vast systems of sunken fields or clearance cairns where only small parts were tilled at any one time. From the 2nd century BCE onward, urn cremation cemeteries and weapon burials with various above-ground stone markers appear, beginning a monumental cemetery record that persists unbroken until the end of the Iron Age. Cemeteries of these roughly 13 centuries are by far the most common type of visible ancient monument in Scandinavia. The reappearance of weapon burial after millennium's hiatus suggests a process of increased social stratification similar to the one at the beginning of the Bronze Age. Roman Iron Age, 400 CE. A Roman attempt to move the imperial border forward from the Rhine to the Elbe was aborted in CE 9 when Germans under Roman-trained leadership defeated the legions of Varus by ambush in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. About this time, a major shift in the material culture of Scandinavia occurred, reflecting increased contact with the Romans. Imported goods, now largely bronze drinking gear, reappear in burials. The early 3rd century sees a brief fluorite of very richly equipped graves on a template from Zealand. Starting in the 2nd century CE, much of southern Sweden's agricultural land was parcelled up with low stone walls. They divided the land into permanent infields and meadows for winter fodder on one side of the wall, and wooded outland where the cattle was grazed on the other side. This principle of landscape organization survived into the 19th century. The Roman period also saw the first large-scale expansion of agricultural settlement up the Baltic coast of the country's northern two-thirds. Hillforts, most of them simple structures on peripheral mountaintops designed as refuges at times of attack, became common toward the end of the Roman period. War booty finds from western Denmark suggest that warriors from coastal areas of modern Sweden participated in large-scale seaborne raids upon that area and were sometimes soundly defeated. Sweden enters proto-history with the Germania of Tacitus in CE 98. Whether any of the brief information he reports about this distant barbaric area was well-founded is uncertain, but he does mention tribal names that appear to correspond with the Swedes and Sami of later centuries. As for literacy in Sweden itself, the runic script was invented among the South Scandinavian elite in the 2nd century, but all that has come down to the present from the Roman period is scurt inscriptions on artifacts, mainly of male names, demonstrating that the people of South Scandinavia spoke Proto-Norse at the time, a language ancestral to modern Swedish and others. Migration period 400–540 CE. The changes in material culture marking the start of the migration period appear to coincide with the arrival of the Huns on the continental stage. A brief tumultuous phase ensued during which the Western Roman Empire collapsed and the Eastern Roman Empire held the barbarians at bay only through enormous peace payments. As a consequence, the Scandinavian elite of the time was inundated with gold. It was used to produce some very fine goldsmith work, including filigree collars and bracteate pendants. The memory of this golden age reverberates through all the main early Germanic poetry cycles, including Beowulf and the Nibelungenlied. Another feature of the migration period that had far-reaching consequences was the development of the first Scandinavian animal art, inspired by provincial Roman ship-carved belt mounts decorated with lions and dolphins along the edges. Scandinavian artisans of the migration period developed first the Nidum style, and then the highly abstract and sophisticated style from c. 450 onward. The migration period was long believed to have been a time of crisis and devastation in Scandinavia. In recent decades, however, scholarship has gravitated to the view that the period was in fact one of prosperity and glorious elite culture, but that it ended with a severe crisis, possibly having to do with the CE 535 to 536 atmospheric dust event and the concomitant famine.